Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I'm here. My name is Erica Rose, and I'm here with my wonderful colleague and friend, Dr. Cast-Brede, and we are the UNO Library Science team. I think many of you know us. And we're really here today to celebrate the fact that you're all superheroes. And I really mean that. We have the opportunity to talk with folks like you fairly regularly, and we love it. And a while back, we decided that we really wanted these conversations to be opportunities to celebrate and validate librarians. And so we hope that through our conversation today, you are reminded of the importance and the value of your work, and you feel really empowered to move forward in excellence. Dr. Cast is associate professor with us at UNO. I'm the program coordinator. All this to say, grab our emails and email us anytime. We actually really love hearing from you, hearing Denise talk about the cool ideas that you're sharing. We feed off of those things too. So feel free to reach out to us if we can ever provide any kind of support or even just encouragement. Okay, so our conversation today really does fit into kind of two buckets. First is this idea of awe, A-W-E. What is it? Why is it important? How does it relate to your work? The second bucket is backward design, and that's a framework that we think might be useful for you as you create programs and services. There's always some comfort in knowing there's method to our madness. So here is our plan for the day, what we hope you will all walk away with after we're finished chatting. This idea of awe, it's really special. It might even be game-changing. I think the world would actually be a better place if more folks knew and are able to celebrate moments of awe. So we hope that happens for you today. We also hope that through our conversation, you discover the process of backward design, how it is related to awe, how it can be used to ensure that you develop dynamic, appealing, diverse, and inclusive services. And then, of course, at the end, this is that tie back to our mission as speakers, where we hope that you feel empowered to use both awe and backward design, not just as effective tools for service design, but also for your work in advocacy. Okay, so this is obviously a giant Lego castle. Anybody who wants to hop in chat and take a gander at how many pieces you think are involved in this particular Lego set. I feel like you all are probably a little bit of subject matter experts when it comes to Legos, because many of you have giant Lego sets in your libraries or maybe in your homes. 7,500, ooh, 10,000. Oh, I can't even imagine how tiny the 10,000 pieces get. Excellent guesstimates. There's actually 6,000 in this particular set. And I want you to just kind of imagine for a minute what it would be like if all 6,000 pieces were handed to you with the instruction to build the thing, but you don't have the picture on the box to guide you. And you're only allowed to see page 1, then page 2, then page 3 of the instruction booklet. You can't skip to the end. You have to just go step by step. You could do it. Those instruction manuals are pretty good. I think you could at least get close to building the Hogwarts castle here. But it's going to take a lot more time to find the right pieces. You're going to make a lot of mistakes along the way. You're probably going to get frustrated because you just don't know what you're building. Whereas opposed to having a vision for what it is that you hope to create changes your entire approach to building a Lego castle. You're probably going to sort your pieces. You're going to determine where you need to build it. You can't do it on a tiny little table. You're going to have room to spread out. You might even be able to think more about how much time is this going to take me? The ability to fast forward and know what it is you hope to achieve greatly increases your efficiency and your effectiveness as you build the thing. And really, next slide, please. We use backward design. Oh, back one. Thanks. We use backward design all the time when we follow patterns, when we create puzzles, or even when we build houses, because we always start with a clear and defined vision of what it is that you hope to achieve in those instances. We build things all the time in libraries. You're builders. You build services, you build programs, buildings, collections. And if we have a clear vision for what it is we hope to achieve, that will help us be more efficient, effective, more intentional as builders as well. Okay, so if any of you had a little spark of adrenaline or that little like fuzzy feeling in your brain where a little light bulb went off for you as you were listening to that analogy, that's important. And I'm going to turn it over to Melissa to talk with you about what it is that you just experienced with that light bulb moment.
So what you experienced is awe. And when I talk to people, friends, family, and said, I'm going to talk about awe, I get this reaction of, ah, like the, tongue depressor, ah. No, it's awe as in awesome. It is such a big part of what we do, whether we realize it or not, and it's a huge part of learning. And so we want to take a little bit of time to explain why it matters and why it's so crucial for libraries to recognize that we're involved with it, and it is a big part of what we do. So awe is that moment, like that aha, right? You can't get away from the word ah, aha. But we all have an idea of how the world works, right? We have a mental model set up in our head of this is how the world is. The physical world, the social world, the emotional world, this is how the world operates. An awe happens when something butts up against those mental models, the boundaries of those mental models, and says, oh, wait a minute, maybe it's not what you thought. Maybe there's something different here. You're startled, so it butts up against those edges of your mental models. And you have to, oh, wait, acknowledge that this is different. So, I have never been to the Grand Canyon. Well, my mother says I was there when I was 1, but I have an idea of what the Grand Canyon is, but I'm almost positive that when I get there, it will be awe, because there's no way my mind can really understand what it is until I see it. So it will butt up against my model of what I think it is. It's kind of like, as this quote says, a little earthquake in your brain. Suddenly what you thought is shook up a bit. It could be shook up a lot, or it could be shook up a little bit, but there's something there. And when it butts up against that, we have to expand our boundaries. We don't have a choice as humans. Something comes up against that, we have to adjust in some way. So awe happens in everything, whether it's science, a new invention, whether it's physiology, such as, I don't know if we have any Husker volleyball fans here, but I watched the Husker women's team yesterday, and Lowenstein, the way she hits that ball just blows my mind. That is odd that that's physically possible for her to jump as high as she does and still be graceful and still just slam that ball into the ground. That is awe. It can be psychology, it can be history, it could be news events on the news. That just, I can't believe that's real. So it isn't always positive like the Grand Canyon or an amazing volleyball player. It can be uncomfortable. It could be a medical diagnosis that suddenly what we thought of our world and our physical health is different than we thought. And that can be jarring, little earthquakes going off in our brain. I think what we're seeing sometimes in the world right now with some of our library challenges are people have a vision of the world, a mental model, and some of our titles are pushing on their boundaries of that. So it's a little moment of awe for them as well. As Erica and I worked on this program and started talking about it, we couldn't help but see connections to Bishop's ideas of mirrors, windows, and sliding doors, which we all think of those in terms of usually children's books and adult books, but it's all of our resources, all of the stuff we have. It's, do we have resources that provide our patrons mirrors into their own world, but also windows into somebody else's world? And what's it like for somebody with a different lived experience, or a sliding door that maybe lets us step in to their life just a little bit, so we have an understanding of a different lived experience and how that can be related to awe. So on the right here on this image, I have a photo of a sculpture that I came across in a library book. So this was a library awe moment for me. I came across it in a library book and just saw this photo. And immediately something in me responded. There was some kind of earthquake going up in my brain. And I still, to this day, when I see it, I get a little just choked up a little bit about it. But there's something about the emotions here that I responded to. I had some awe of my understanding, and I didn't understand why. And then I read the description below. And the description below, this is a sculpture, by the way, by Augusta Savage during the Harlem Renaissance period. She's most known for teaching artists, but this is a sculpture she did of her nephew. And it is the moment he realized what it was to be Black as a 5-6-year-old boy, that, oh, this means something different than other kids. That was, over 30 years ago, this experience. Yet it was awe that I could feel those emotions, and it was very different than my experiences as a skinny white girl in a college in Iowa, but also the awe that an artist could do this and convey these things, and it still would show through in a photograph, because I've never seen this in person. I've only seen photographs of this sculpture. So let's pause for a second. And now that we've talked about awe, if you, in the chat box, please, would think about the last time you experienced awe. Yeah, it could be like similar to an example I just mentioned, or something else entirely.
So as people are thinking about that, I have a very silly example of awe that I would like to share, because sometimes awe is serious and sometimes it makes you giggle. My son has a 3D printer. He's 11 and he's really excited about it. And he likes to look for crazy designs that he can make in print. And he came upstairs yesterday morning, very proud of his latest 3D print, it's called the Rocktopus. And it is the head of Dwayne Johnson, the Rock, with 8 little jiggly octopus legs underneath. It is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. But it definitely pushed the bounds of my mental model for what creativity looks like. I see there's some really good responses coming in here.
There we have nature and art, the Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island, skyscrapers. Are they not phenomenal?
Mm-hmm.
Right, especially for those of us who don't see them very often. Yeah.
Oh yeah, so
Human
much
behavior,
in New York.
Right, our pets, books. Oh my gosh, that we could probably go on about the how many times we finished a book and just went, wow. Mm-hmm. Wow. So that's part of what we do. We inspire awe all the time. We learned if we owl in the same room with you and you close your eyes, you will never hear it flying. It's super cool. That is super cool. That is super cool. Yeah, so we're constantly doing this. As a result, it inspires our learning. Like there's a lot of stuff from college I do not remember, but I still remember that sculpture because awe was attached to it. And it made me start thinking critically about the world, asking questions about the world. I started feeling connections to folks that maybe normally I wouldn't have connections to. And when we start connecting with each other, that encourages pro-social behavior, helps us get along better, which creates engagement and deeper engagement. That long-term memory with that learning sticks with us. But as it all comes together for our well-being, when we have awe in our life, it helps inspire our well-being, even the negative stuff, because we have to process it, we have to deal with it, we have to adjust to it. So why does this happen? Or when does this happen? You need an idea of vastness. So something has to be big. So the Grand Canyon is obvious, but it can also just be the idea is something that is bigger than you thought. I mean, honestly, who thought to put Dwayne Johnson's head on an octopus? That concept is bigger than anything I could have considered. So it's beyond that. There is a vastness, you realize, of the options of combinations that someone could make. That's vast. It could be an emotional experience that's vast, expands our idea of what is real. Historical event, the significance. And here, the last one, a large amount of unexpected information, which is what most of our libraries are and contain. When this happens, we have to accommodate them because we have an expectation of the world. And when our expectation of the world is not reflected back or is not what we see, it's a violation of expectations. It's a whole technical term, violation of expectations. And mentally, we have to adjust. As humans, our brain says, no, this isn't right. We have to adjust. We have to adjust our perspective, really think about it because we have a need for closure. We have to investigate. We have to be curious about it so we can close it and we can adjust our boundaries and move on. With libraries, sometimes we have so much that it's hard to be odd because there's just too much. You know, when it comes to technology anymore, it's hard to impress people with technology because science fiction movies and all that stuff have shown us anything's possible. So when something happens, it's just, of course I can do that. Of course that's possible. So technology is hard. With libraries too, sometimes we have so much that it's hard to find the awe. So we have to be sure and take advantage of it and make sure we center a lot of what we do in awe so it doesn't get lost and we connect to that learning, to that engagement. The big question then is, as we started looking at this, is how do we do this? How do you do that? And when I went to the library literature and we started looking, and there's not much there about it. We're so busy doing our work, we don't think about what's in our work. So we started looking at some of our friends in museums and wildlife attractions, because a lot of nature came up a lot on our list of awe. And they really write about it and how they're using it and taking advantage of awe in their programming. And throughout the literature, it's clear that you need three things. You need stuff, material objects. You need an atmosphere for learning, and you need time for reflection. So material objects, right? We have lots of stuff, don't we? We just talked about Legos. We have lots of things for hands-on interaction, and we all know how that helps with learning, memory, curiosity, understanding things, social interactions, because as you're doing it, the person next to you, you're like, I need some help, I don't get that, or the person sees you and goes, oh, wow, that's awesome. Material objects are very important. So are we engaging? And we see that. I know a couple of years ago, the Nebraska Library Commission had some grants where some libraries were able to get sewing machines. And people were able to create things and expand their ideas of, oh, what can I do? That's awe. On the right is a picture from our colleague, former school librarian, and she got a hold of a manual typewriter and just set it out. And these kids had never seen a manual typewriter before, and they were awed. You can see there's a line. She had to cut it off because so many kids wanted to come in and check out this typewriter. So for them, that was awe that this thing existed. and how do you use it? The one example I did find in libraries was an embroidery club. The library had a club that would meet together regularly to embroider. And so they were using the art books in the library for inspiration of things to create and sew. And so this shows a work of illumination where they would get in there and they would just be so awed by the work and the intricacies involved in manuscript illustration. The awe of that led to the creation of that. But what about kits? We have tons of kits that get folks out in nature to experience awe, whether it's fishing, hiking, bird watching. Maybe it's an art kit, a craft kit, which leads to awe of, wow, what can I create? So that's material objects, but we also need an atmosphere where we know something is happening. Right? And libraries have that atmosphere already. You know, you come in the door, you know you're in a library. You know you're not in the bank. You're not at the gas station, you know where you are. So libraries come equipped with atmosphere. And when stuff is happening, you can't help but look. That's the typewriter. They saw a line, they had to come see. You know, 170 people doing a scavenger hunt. That's creating an atmosphere and looking at it, because you lose sense of where you are and you know you're someplace different. We do this all the time with our children's libraries. I just picked these pictures because they were awesome and amazing. We don't always have the budgets to do something like this, but we do so many little things to make our children's spaces special and awe. Like those giant, huge teddy bears you can get at Walmart after Christmas for really cheap. To a 3-year-old, that giant teddy bear is awe. That is so cool. I think Gretna Public Library is still doing this. I don't know, but every time a child checks out during 1 month a year to show how much their outreach, what their reach is, for every book a child checks out, they get a Lego and they add it to a tower, a Lego tower. So by the end of the month, they have this huge tower, and that signifies how many books circulated that month. That is off. They put it right by the window, so anybody walking by sees this Lego tower. That is awe. So we can do simple things to create awe. And then we just have our books. Yeah, whether it's on the left, that's very what we consider traditional historical library. On the right is a very modern library, but what they share are the books. And research shows that just being around the books, that atmosphere being around the books, makes people more feel connected to scholarly ideas, connected to thinking and doing it. So when they surveyed like college students and said, oh, you want all this digital, we should get rid of the books. And they're like, no, you can't get rid of the books. Those books inspire me, help me focus, because they create an atmosphere. So we already have the atmosphere ready to go. And then finally, you need reflection, where I just had this experience, I interacted with it in this great environment, thinking about it, processing it, not just moving on and going then, but taking time to think about it. And it doesn't have to be right away. It can be a follow-up 2 weeks later. But are you reflecting on it later? It will stick with you longer. Our book clubs, that's what book clubs do. It's reflection. That's their whole focus. The social piece of it brings that reflection and that awe we felt when we finished that amazing book. This is another photo from another colleague. They are caterpillars that their early childhood program would monitor over a week. So every week they check in on these. How did they change? How did they grow? You can see they gave them names so they could keep track of them all, who did what and how did they grow. That's reflection. That's critical thinking. And so they followed their progress until hopefully they became butterflies. I never did hear the end of that story, but that's reflection. Are we displaying art in our libraries? You know, the Bennington Public Library has a student art show every month. where they have students contributing art, and they always ask 3 questions to require reflection. Like, what emotions were you feeling when you created this? And I hear that they get so very in deep in what they were creating. And so then when people come and look at this art and they see those questions for themselves, that's reflection. And then you can have conversations with artists if you want, collaborate with schools on this, but it brings reflection into what's happening in your library. So I just rattled off a bunch of examples. And I mentioned a couple local libraries and some of the things they do that inspire awe, provide opportunities for awe. And we heard some earlier before we started the presentation about a scavenger hunt that had over 100 people. That's awe. So what else are you doing that you talked about maybe this morning that Eric and I weren't lucky enough to hear?
One of my favorite librarian awe moments that I've come across in the last couple of years was when I saw the pictures from the Wyoming librarians who had formed a pig wrestling team and rolled up in there and wrestled that pig. And I just think about how many people had a completely different perception of their librarians at that moment. I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that certainly jutted up against our mental models of what a librarian is, right? And made them think differently about there. So yeah, having games and toys out lets your patrons, your youth in your community create their own moments of awe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you let them do it. One of the things I've done with the Chris library is the human library. And that's just a matter of getting people in your community to come together and be a human book where someone else can just for 30 minutes hear their story of their life and the awe that you get. These stories that you don't even realize people are going through and what they've dealt with. Let's see what we got here. Pumpkin decorating. It's amazing what people can do with a pumpkin now. I don't even carve anymore because I just am not worthy. Pumpkin seeds. Yeah. Cindy Lou Who wig. Costumes. Again, it's constantly changing our mental models of that. And a kid coming in, seeing somebody in a costume, that's all for them.
I love that in Sierra's library, they include the voting piece of it too, where the community gets to come in and participate and gets to that collaborative thing that happens when people experience it.
And that's reflection. You had to stop and think, oh, which one did I like? Why did I like that? Explain yourself, if only to yourself. Like, oh, did I like this one or do I like this one? Yeah.
This is amazing. And please feel free to continue to fill the chat box with things that you're doing, because I think it's, one, it's just empowering to see it, and then also really cool ideas coming through. Oh, a tiny art show. I think those things are so cool. Yeah. I hope I can maybe see a picture of that sometime. So you're telling us about all the things that you're already doing that demonstrate awe in libraries. And then you've also reflected on moments in your own life where you've experienced awe. And I just want to take that one step further and kind of remind you that you've also experienced awe in libraries. In fact, I think those moments that we experienced in libraries probably drew us to the profession, or they've convicted us to stay. You know, it's things like the book that changed our lives when we were young, the librarian who made us feel like we belonged. It might be the reverence that we felt when we walked into our university libraries for the first time. I just feel that for many of us, awe is probably what brought us here. And there's something powerful that happens when we understand this incredible aspect of our work, because when we know how it feels to experience it and we want to give this to other people, and we start thinking about how creating moments of awe is possible in every aspect of what we do. And we start thinking about how can we embed more of this, it actually becomes part of our mission. And it is directly tied to how we think about the value we bring to our service communities. So it makes sense then that we start to think about this as part of our service design, not just what sometimes happens as a result of our services, but we've actually designed services to create awe. So this is where backward design comes in. In addition to thinking about how this is really a reordering of our usual planning processes, we are also going to think about how we can infuse awe throughout that planning process. So next slide, please. I want to talk about traditional service design first. That's fine. Yeah, right there's good. We're not very good at this, Melissa. It's hard when one person has to drive the slides. So traditional service design is, kind of the processes that we've used for creating a program. And before I talk about that, let me make clear that this is not a criticism of the amazing programs you design every day. The processes and procedures that you're using are working. You are implementing all kinds of meaningful programs, as evidenced by the chat box, which is on fire right now, which is amazing. But I think that backward design can be a scaffolding that allows us to be even more effective at what we do and more efficient. And hopefully through this illustrative process, you'll see what I mean. So typical service design approach you see right here. We have an idea for content. We have some logistics planning that happens, and then, we let it go and we hope that it works out. So just an example of this. I'm going to use art as an example for a traditional service design program. Next slide, please. We might say, we have a staff member here who's pretty good at art. Let's see if Mike will do an art program for us. Mike agrees. So we're going to put it on the calendar. We buy some paints. He decides, yeah, watercolor is my jam. So 10 watercolor paint sets. We get some cookies. We make some flyers, and then we have the program, and we hope that it goes well. So after the fact, we say, okay, how did it go? Next slide, please. and we think it went okay. People showed up, they painted, they chatted, they had a cookie, and it was good. And in many cases, it really does work just fine. Our programs are good. Some are even a home run. Our patrons come, they leave with a smile. We know we've done something good. But there's also the piece of this where we design programs and we put it out there, and then we all just cross our fingers and hope and pray that people show up. And we think like, oh my gosh, is this going to work? Is it not going to work? We've all been talking for years about what is the secret sauce that helps us guarantee that this program is going to work. I don't have the secret sauce, but I think I have a way we're moving towards that here through backward design. So what if we can do better? What if we can do it more consistently? What if we can facilitate moments of awe in our programs? So we start planning for awesome. And this is where backward design comes in as this rearranging of the chain of events we just discussed. So here you can see with backward design, we start first with some very intentional thinking about what is it that we want to achieve? What are the desired results? What do we want people to walk away with? What do we want them to experience from this program? We do that before anything else. We do that before we pick our content, or at least in tandem with our selection of content. We do that before we start planning for any logistics, supplies, location, anything. Once we have that in place, then we can start thinking about what we need to put in the plan to make that happen. You'll notice that we also have assessment and evaluation, which is new to our planning process. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. And then finally, after we do all of that, we can look at facilitating the program. So why backwards design? I really believe that the incorporation of backward design lends itself to transparency and explicit instruction. In other words, everybody knows what we're doing. Everybody's working towards the same goal. There's no more happy accidents because we have that clear purpose. Purpose gives us a point at which to aim. And then it also serves as a guide along the way as we make decisions to keep us moving towards that goal. When we know our purpose, we can also work more cohesively with our teams. Everybody knows what it is that we're trying to achieve. We can make plans that are very intentional and meaningful rather than happenstance or just kind of our same old habits. And this means that every detail of planning should help us facilitate our end goal. It should get us to whatever it is we decided that we wanted to achieve from the very beginning. That changes how we make decisions about the resources that we're going to need. So how do we begin with the end in mind? It's easier said than done, I know that. And it feels a little bit like being put on the spot. And I'll just share, when I was in a library, I once did a team program focusing on ekphrastic poetry, and 5 points of extra credit to anybody who knows what ekphrastic poetry is, because it feels like kind of like a word of the day to me. For those of you who don't know, ekphrastic poetry is really poems written about works of art. And very much like my discussion about Mike the artist, we had Brad the poet in my library. And so I said, hey, Brad, you want to do this program? And he said, yes. And so we worked together to do this team program about ekphrastic poetry. Why did we do this? We had the staff expertise for it. What was my goal? I honestly have no idea, because I needed to do a team program. We had a quota to meet every month. And it ended up being this really cool partnership with a high school English teacher who sent her students in for extra credit. But if I had known my goals from the start, there was so much more that I could have done to promote the event, to organize and facilitate it in a way that was more accessible and more appealing to a much larger group of teens. And I'll return to that later. So we need to determine and articulate our goals from the start. And in order to do this, you need to ask essential questions about your program, your content, your service. For example, ask questions like, what is it that your community celebrates? What do your patrons need? Where are the gaps in your services? And from there, we need to think about big ideas. Keep asking questions to determine those big ideas. As we think about our program and our service content, big ideas are the place where we want to put a spotlight, because they represent kind of the heart and soul of a program. So this is where you think about things like, what are the most important aspects of your content? What is the heart and soul of this topic? What are the 2 or 3 things that you want everybody to know or experience from this program? Melissa and I kind of shared our big ideas with you at the very beginning of this when we talked about what our program objectives were. And when we do this, this is where we really see that key opportunity for creating or enhancing awe. So what is it that exists in this art program, in this nature program, in this scavenger hunt, where there are going to be opportunities for ensuring that awe happens for people? So thinking about how then in logistics planning, our service, our program, or our facility creates awesome moments. And that's where we get to BHAG, which in itself is awesome. It stands for big, hairy, audacious goals. And I really just wanted to use this acronym because I love it. But now that we know about awe, we use this as a way to look for those big ideas. So how can you highlight whatever that thing is about your program that will create moments of awe. So thinking back to my teen program, I think the big ideas there were the fusion of poetry and art. It's the fact that poetry can be used as a means for expression and connection, a way for teenagers who are very different to come together and connect over something. And also this idea of bringing life to poetry outside the classroom. Those are all of, I think, the big ideas, the awe-inspiring things. And if I had thought about that, it would have changed the way that I approached my design to the program. For instance, instead of sitting everybody in just the regular old meeting room setup, we would have sat in groups so that they could collaborate and share with each other. I would have built in collaboration time as they work together. Instead of using whatever boring painting we found as the inspiration for their poems, I think we would have brought in artwork that was more relevant to our age group and target audience. You know, maybe some graphic novel art, or maybe they could have written about music that they really connect with. And then it certainly would have changed the way that I communicated with English teachers to provide a much broader audience, because all of them, I think, would have been excited about the idea where we bring poetry to life outside the classroom. So I think the next piece of this is talking about how diversity, equity, inclusion is such an important part of this discussion. So just again, clarifying that acronym, DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a few different versions of that. But Melissa provided this beautiful example of how encountering diversity actually facilitates awe in and of itself. Just experiencing something outside of ourselves is awe-inspiring. We know this, right? We know that exposing people to new things, to different ideas, a variety of cultures and perspectives, all of these things are powerful ways to facilitate awe. And we've already decided this, what we're trying to do here, more awe in our programs. So it makes sense then that we would prioritize diversity in our content as a goal throughout. Also, awe happens in different ways for different people. What's awesome to me is what's different than is awesome to Melissa versus what's different than is awesome to Anne, etc. The diversity around us requires diverse content in order to be appealing and for those awesome moments to be experienced. So prioritizing diversity in program content leads us to awe. I'd also like to touch on the I here, which is inclusivity. And to be inclusive, we have to be mindful, not just that we have great diversity in our content, but also that we facilitate our programs in a way that ensures they're accessible to as many people as possible. This may change when we decide to hold our programs, or how we decide to market, or even how we work with our facilitators. You know, do we need to include a microphone or use a sign language interpreter or use closed captions in our virtual program, etc. Okay, so let's practice, because we know that you all have programs in development, whether, I mean, it's probably your Halloween programs, or you're thinking about holiday programs. Some of you overachievers who I have great respect for are already thinking about next year's summer reading programs. So thinking about that again in the chat box, what are you doing? What do you have in the works where you might be able to really think about awe? Now that you're kind of thinking of this as a framework and using backward design, what are you thinking? Oh yeah, summer reading, this is going to be the heart and soul. I really want to create opportunities for connection, or we're really going to focus on art in this program, or it's all about using nature as a way to inspire awe. And we do realize that we are kind of putting you on the spot to do some kind of significant, reflection and articulation here.
I think about mandolin making classes, and Talk like a pirate day.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are moments in that. Letting Harry Potter alone.
Mm-hmm.
Harry Potter night.
Well, yeah, and that tiny art show too. Everything about that pushes the mental models. More programs to connect patrons to art and nature. Ooh, try something new nights. I love that idea.
Yeah.
Adventure bags for littles and stream kits for older kids. Yeah. You know, I appreciate that you bring up the financing piece of this, Stephanie, because, you know, having the resources to do all of these things is a very important reality. As you all continue to think about that, I'm going to move us on to kind of the next piece of this. Oh, Lori, this is where I get stuck. Our goals are always to get people to experience something new, to come into the library, to make connections, but are they BHAG enough? You know, I think that's a really insightful question. And I also think that a big piece of this is the fact that you're already doing these things, but something kind of magical happens when you acknowledge that you're doing them. And it kind of changes the way that we communicate with our patrons and our stakeholders about it. So, you know, yes, we're going to make some small tweaks to service design, maybe because of this. But for sure, then when you're talking with your stakeholders or you're talking with patrons about these exciting new programs, all of a sudden we've shifted the narrative to how they're going to experience something awesome. And it kind of just changes the way everybody thinks about it. We have a terrific Tuesday group. We do Legos, card games. And yes, I'm working on Summer Reading 2023. You're amazing, Jody.
Right. I think the other thing to consider about BHAG ideas is it really depends on your audience. What your audience, like I said, that 3-year-old will think that big giant teddy bear is pretty BHAG. Mm-hmm. So what you're worrying about is being BHAG enough may be amazing to someone else. And so don't, you know, be aware of your audience and some of these simple things. I was talking to a cousin who was in Alliance and they had sand out, and that just blew her mind that somebody would put sand in the library for kids to play in for the special project they were doing that day. That was a pretty big, hairy, audacious thing to do in my cousin's point of view. She thought it was fabulous, but it just was it. So our community's perceptions of that may be different than ours.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, so thinking about that logistics planning, I think you're all right there. So how will the program or first service facility create awesome moments? And then how does that change how we plan things out, where we're going to have it, the supplies that we're going to include? And to, I think, the next slide here, how we are going to market the program. Oh, no, never mind. That's not the next slide, which is fine. Okay, so let's hang here for a minute and I will come back to marketing briefly. So using this flipped model, using this idea that we're going to infuse awe throughout, let's just go back to our original art program and see how this sort of changes things. So backwards design, what is it that I want to achieve through this art program? Well, I know I really want people to explore a variety of artistic mediums. I think it's important that they see that art is maybe more broad and has something that appeals to lots of different folks in it. I want people to be able to apply basic techniques to a variety of art forms. I want them to actually feel empowered as artists themselves. So there's some instruction that's involved there. And also, I think it would be amazing if people could discover and celebrate art within the community. So knowing those are our intended results, then think about how that's going to change the logistics for the program planning. Thinking about where my big, hairy, audacious goals are, it's the fact that I want to create opportunities for community members to benefit from experiencing art emotionally, cognitively, physically. It applies on every level. I want to inspire their own creative potential. And I also really want to nurture enthusiasm for artistic expertise within my community. So with all of that in mind, then that's going to change every decision I make about how I facilitate this program. Next slide, please. Perfect. So knowing I want to introduce a bunch of different artistic mediums, I actually need a series, not just one watercolor program. That means I probably need multiple facilitators with different artistic expertise. There's definitely an opportunity for community partnerships in this to maybe provide supplies or food or some of the marketing that I want to do. And it also changes, I think, where I'm going to facilitate some of these events. You know, maybe I decide I want to have an art show where after the programs, people are going to display their art throughout the library, and then people can come in and reflect on those things. What we see here through all of this is that we're actually all the way back to those three elements for facilitating awe that Melissa mentioned earlier, which are material objects and atmosphere and reflection. Material objects is absolutely covered in the fact that people are going to interact with things with their hands, actually being in the creative driver's seat. We're going to create atmosphere as we basically turn the library into a place for artistic display. And then through all of those things, people will have opportunities to reflect on their own creative potential and on the creativity of others. It's awesome. And back to then our emphasis here on diversity, equity, and inclusion, that also impacts how we set up the logistics for our program, how we market it. Are we marketing to the same three places that we always do, the flyer, the press release, and the website? Or are there opportunities for us to reach out into different pockets of our community and ensure that this is on people's radar? As we discussed before, it impacts how we make discussions about content and then also how we do evaluation and assessment. And I'm realizing we're getting kind of short on time here, so we better move on to evaluation and assessment. This, we know, could be a whole thing in and of itself. And basically what we know about evaluating our programs is pretty much everybody collectively agrees we should do this. And that's about where it stops, because this is a whole other thing to worry about and figure out how to do, and then find the resources to make sure that it gets implemented. But it's really important, if we're going to determine what it is that we did really well, where we can feed our celebrations and successes and then make adjustments for our growth opportunities. Next slide, please. Couple of things to think about for evaluation and assessment. We have quantitative and qualitative data, numerical facts, figures, statistics. These are things like your program attendance, gate counts, search stats, things that you probably are all tracking, the digital traffic on your website. The qualitative assessment is really focused on an expression of experience. So we get these things through some of the comments people write to us on our surveys, through our own observations about what worked, through other people's observations about that. Group feedback and reflective practice are all part of qualitative evaluation. And really, we need both in order to make really good decisions about what's working and what's not working in our programs. The other thing about evaluation and assessment is that it gives you data that you can share with stakeholders that's really powerful for you. Your school district might find it very interesting that you have huge attendance at programs that you talk about how they facilitate awe and how powerful that is as a part of learning. They might be interested in data in which you can share the literacy program successes that you're having and make a direct correlation then to reading scores in your community. Don't just keep your celebrations to yourself. Don't just keep your awesome programs and experiences to yourself. Use this as a way to advocate for the importance and the relevance and the tremendous impact of your services. So, in summary, we covered a lot of ground here. A lot of discussion about how powerful is in learning and engagement. You now have backward design as a tool for programming, thinking through your outcomes first, the value that you provide first, and then moving into the design phase. And hopefully you feel really empowered because you've recognized how often you are implementing in your activities already, and you're inspired to think about how you might do even more of this. And then you also have a whole lot of language here that you can use when communicating the value of your services to stakeholders. So I think we have a references slide for anybody who wants to go down the and backward design rabbit hole through that QR code right there. And I think we have 2 minutes for questions if anybody has anything they want to ask or add.
Wow, you've given us a lot to think about here.
Good.
Yeah.
We're hoping that's good.
It is, because I do programming, that's kind of what I do. So yeah, I'm like Lori saying, I really need to process a little bit here because I'm always grabbing it. What's the newest, what's the biggest splash, what's happening in libraries, but I don't always, I have to stop and think about why I'm doing this. What's my purpose? What's my intention? And I should think of that ahead of time. You're right.
It's hard. And we know how busy everyone is and how many hats you wear and how much has to happen in a really short amount of time within the budget. So, we get that.
And it's one of those things, I think, that when you first start, it seems time consuming and more time consuming and stuff like that. But once you've done it, you realize that actually it can maybe save you some time because you don't have to backtrack because you figured some things out in advance. Because, I don't know, maybe it's just me. When I was doing a program, I'd get like halfway in the middle of it and it's like, oh, wait a minute. I didn't think about this and I got to go back and do that. And then I've got to correct again and adjust. And thinking about purpose first kind of can save you time in terms of, maybe I don't have to go back and backtrack and refigure this situation out.
Mm-hmm. Great point.
Yeah. Well, I know we're seeing it in the chat. Thank you so much for your time and thoughtfulness in this program because we appreciate it. And now Carrie wants to do a tiny art program. So she heard about Lori's, and so now that's kind of how Thursday morning meetings work for us as we go home with a dozen ideas. But yes,
that's great.
Thank you so much. And we really appreciate it. And we will put this up on our YouTube channel and I will send you a link to it. And I'll send it out to all of our system as well.
That's great. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Love spending time with you all.
We do enjoy having you. Anytime you have something you want to talk about, we want to listen. So
it's great to see you, Denise. Thank you all.
Yeah. Thanks for coming in. We'll talk to you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.